Happy New Year! The Florida Gators are making the college football playoff in 2025.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back to another new year of Florida Gators football and another new year of Locked On Gators. We're here, your team every day. Happy Wednesday. Happy New Year. If you went out and celebrated, hopefully stay safe, responsible, all that fun stuff. I am Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work, New York Giants on SI. And like I said, the Florida Gators are making the college football playoff in 2025. And I say that because we had some very early bold predictions that we're putting out into the world, speaking it into existence. And the first one that I have that I think is a bold prediction for us is Florida Gators making the college football playoff. That's where I'm going with. And I have been saying for basically the past month or so, probably a little longer. I've been saying this since last year. Can you believe that? Sorry, that's the only one. That's the only one we're going to do with the last year thing. That's it. We're done. But I've been saying that I think the expectation for the Florida Gators in 2025 should be the playoff, right? That, like, at least for me, the way that I look at it is you're entering year 4 for Billy Napier. You're entering year 4 as the head coach at the University of Florida. And 2023 was a roller coaster of a season for the fan base and the team, of course. But also 2024, you were a couple of, I don't want to say a couple of plays, but you were a play away versus Tennessee and an injury away potentially versus Georgia from being in the college football playoff. If you didn't start the season like just absolute dog crap, you're in the college football playoff. And I know that I forgot who it was. I forgot which commentator it was, but against Texas that they were saying, oh, yeah, Florida should keep Billy Napier because next year your schedule is not as hard. Next year, there's a lot of quarterbacks who are going to be gone that you had to face this year. And he's not wrong about that part. I don't think that's a good reason to keep a coach is that, oh, well, next year is going to be easier. But I do think that it makes sense to have different expectations for the schedule next year. You're not going to face Cam Ward, Heisman finalist quarterback. You're not going to face Jackson Dart, who kept that Ole Miss offense on schedule. Granted, you won that game anyway. You're not going to face any wide receivers against Tennessee late in the season because they apparently just don't have any. I don't know what happened, but they all just left. They saw Nico Yamiliava throw, and they were like, you know what? Yeah, I'm good with this. I've seen this for 2 years now. I'm good with this because the first year in practice and then this past year. But I think that when you look at this season coming up, your expectations should be higher. We'll talk about, building blocks and all that at a later date, but you start off with your cupcake, Long Island University. I mean, your very prestigious New York University program. You got the LIU Sharks, then USF. So you've got those two cupcakes to start the year. Then you got LSU, Miami, bye week, Texas A&M, Mississippi State. Then bye week, Georgia, Kentucky, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Florida State. Overall, I do feel like this is a more broken up schedule as to where your tough games are. Like, yeah, LSU and Miami probably both going to be tough, right? Back to back, both of them road games. Going to be tough. But you get Texas at home, travel to A&M, get Mississippi State at home. So it's not like there's just gauntlet. That's not a thing. And I do think that helps you, especially when injuries pile up, right? If injuries piled up like they did for Florida in that back stretch where it's Georgia and Texas back-to-back, and then you manage to beat LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida State. But if you are healthy for those stretches earlier, you've probably got a better shot of finding more success throughout the season, right? So for me, Florida Gators making the college football playoff, we have to see them actually do it. But don't forget, this is also the Lagway window. I promise you, if Billy Napier is the head coach in 2026, I will once again be saying college football playoff. And in 2026, I'll be saying college football playoff with at least one win in that college football playoff or a bye week. You got to make it past the first round. And that's the thing. I don't think I'm being unreasonable when I say making the college football playoff is the expectation. I'm not saying the championship. I'm not saying to make it to the semifinal. I'm saying making the college football playoff is my expectation for the Florida Gators this year. I do think they'll do it. I think you have to do it. And if you don't do it, then again, like I've said this before, if you don't do it, then we're having a conversation, a very uncomfortable conversation about the coaching staff, because this is your time. They've done a fantastic job of filling out a roster, right? Your offensive line looks pretty good. We'll talk about them next. But your offensive line looks pretty good. Receiver room is really ecstatic. You got DJ Lagway. This is your Lagway window. You did a great job of going out there and landing a superstar quarterback, landing a potentially generational quarterback. And I've said this before too. I don't think he's generational. He's potentially generational, but you can't be generational with where he's at. You got to at least climb towards your ceiling. And if you can get toward your ceiling, then we're talking about generational. But you've got all that. You've got a good amount of defenders coming back. You've lost some key players to it. Shamar James declaring for the draft. Cam Jackson out of eligibility. So you've lost some key players, but you've also got a lot of guys back. And a lot of guys who've just been in the system. Not starters, but have been in the system for a couple years now. You've got the tools. Like, this is the recipe. This is a championship recipe. We will give Billy Napier and this coaching staff credit. This is the championship recipe. But, you know, if you overcook it, undercook it, maybe a little seasoning. But, you know, he spent some time in Louisiana. I think he could season fine. But you've got the roster-wise, you've been building this roster for a championship. And you look like you should be able to do it. Now it's up to, are you simply put a good enough coach to get it done? That's all it comes down to at that point. Are you a good enough coach to get it done? We'll see, but I definitely do think that this team can and should make the college football playoff in 2025. I want to see the Gators there, right? Hell, maybe a home game in the Swamp for the college football playoff would be freaking nuts. Can you imagine that? Whew. Whew. We'll talk about another bold prediction next on Locked On Gators. So I love going to live events. I've told you guys, like I've gone to, upwards of, I think it was 6. Hell, you know what? I got a great story for you. So I was in Washington, D.C. this past weekend. So the weekend before New Year's Eve. I was in Washington, D.C. We were hanging out at the bar. And I was like, you know what? Let me just check Game Time and see what's there. Like, let me just see what's happening in D.C. And I see, right, the Knicks are there. They played Saturday and Monday. I'm talking about Friday night. We had this conversation. And then I see the Knicks are in with a bunch of Knicks fans. So at the bar, we actually decide, you get the hint. At the bar, we actually decide, let's go to the Knicks game. We got to see in person Jalen Brunson drop 55. We got to see an overtime win for the Knicks. We got to see Cat drop another 30. We got to see a hell of a game. Josh Hart didn't get his triple-double like I bet on, but he did get it on Monday against the Wizards. I'm just saying. Take the guesswork of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account. Use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account with code Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's Game Time, baby. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. And we're going out with another bold prediction here. And for the first time since 2002, 2003, the Florida Gators will have a 1,000-yard receiver in 2024. First off, it's kind of insane that they haven't yet had a 1,000-yard receiver since then, just considering you've had multiple first-round receivers come and go. You had a Heisman finalist quarterback in Kyle Trask. You had a generational tight end in Kyle Pitts. You had a lot going your way, and somehow have not been able to finish off the 1,000-yard receiver in 2 decades, which is wild to me, especially when you consider, like, go back to the Urban Meyer days. I know they ran the football a lot. I get it. But that's just the fact of the matter now. That's where we're at. Also, if the Florida Gators make the college football playoff, that's at least one more game that you get. More stats, right? Win one of those, that's another game that you get. You see where I'm going? But I do think that it's time for the Florida Gators to get a 1,000-yard receiver, and I do think that they'll be able to get it this year. First off, this season in 2024, you had, like I've said so many times, there were no gaps. There were no easy games. There was none of that. That's what made the schedule so difficult. No easy games. In 2025, you start the aside from Samford. In 2025, you start the year with LIU. Then you got USF. You're still going to have Mississippi State. You got a couple of teams that are on your schedule that don't look too good defensively. You should be able to score, right? You've also got to consider the DJ Lagway deep ball tendencies, right? Because when you look at the Florida Gators this year, you're not going to have Elijah Badger back for 2025. So he's out of eligibility. He's going to the NFL. That's fine. That's great for him. But you had Elijah Badger put up 800 yards without DJ Lagway starting the whole year. Think about it. Look at Elijah Badger's stats. Samford, 123 yards. Kentucky, 148 yards. LSU, 131 yards. Ole Miss, 87 yards. All the DJ Lagway games, right? Miami, 43. Lagway was throwing them. You look at the Texas A&M game. They were flipping quarterbacks. He had 94. Mississippi State, flipping quarterbacks, had 45. UCF, flipping quarterbacks, had 41. Tennessee, flipping quarterbacks for most of the game, and then Graham Mertz gets hurt, just 30 yards. Georgia, DJ Lagway gets hurt, 36 yards. Florida State, they had 11 yards. Or he had 11 yards. Tulane, he had 17 yards. He had wildly inconsistent stretches and still had 806 yards. Imagine if he was just getting, a little more volume in the bowl and Florida State games. And you had Lagway all year with the deep ball tendencies. Like then we're talking about, okay, we're really close, if not passing 1,000 yards there. Now I look at, it was Vernon Brown III, I think it was, that the other day gave the interview where he's like, you know what? I think this offense is going to be way more spread out. I think we're gonna see more 10 personnel, which we hear that every year. I'll believe it when I see it. Like even things that we hear behind the scenes and things that we see publicly or hear publicly, I will believe that that's going to happen when I see it. Because I feel like every year we've heard that and it's never come to fruition yet. So I'll believe it when I see it. But let's say this offense does become more spread. They're going to air it out a bit more. A lot of speed. And DJ Lagway loves throwing the deep ball. And I bring up the DJ Lagway throwing the deep ball because you don't need, 70 catches to get to 1,000 yards. That's just not how college football. In the NFL, you're more likely talking about that, sure. But in college football, you see guys get there without the insane number of catches. I mean, we've had, it was Trey Harris, I think, one of the Ole Miss receivers did it on 60. And Illinois had a guy almost get there on 50. Like, you don't need that. You need big plays. That's what gets you there. And for Florida, you're likely going to have those big plays. You've got DJ Lagway, loves throwing the deep ball. I think that Tre Wilson is probably the most likely candidate to get there, right? If he remains healthy, which obviously another thing, I'm not predicting injuries or anything like that. So if Tre Wilson stays healthy, I feel like he's the most likely candidate. He's going to get the pop passes that you figure at some point going to break one for a long run, or a long catch and run, I guess. So you got that. J. Michael Sturdivant could just be a guy that has, 24 yards per catch. He's just a deep ball guy. That could just be what he does, right? Dallas Wilson, not going to play enough, I think, to be a 1,000-yard receiver. I think he's going to back up J. Michael Sturdivant, but he's going to be in the conversation. You're going to have a lot of guys that are going to be in the conversation as significant contributors. And I think that when you look at DJ Lagway looking for the deep ball as frequently as he does, and this offense, we're told, hey, they're going to go more spread out. They're going to go more up tempo. All that sounds like this passing attack should be really good. And one of the most important parts of it is, and I mentioned this earlier, you've got basically your whole offensive line returning, right? From 2024 to 2025, the only starting offensive lineman that's not going to be with the Florida Gators is going to be Brandon Crenshaw-Dickson. That's it. Everybody else is expected to be back. But when you see, hey, we've got Austin Barber back, we've got Najee Harris back, we've got Jake Slaughter back, we've got Damian George back, we've got Bryce Levitt's going to be competing for reps somewhere. Rod Kearney might be competing for reps somewhere. You've got a lot of your offensive line returning. You've got a lot of young guys that you recruited and developed. And look, I've said this for a while now. I don't like the way that Rob Sale's done things. I don't know if he'll be back, but I don't think he will be. But I don't like the way he's recruited, because I feel like the way he's recruited is we're going to go for these physical freaks, these big athletes that are aggressive and dual sport athletes and multi-sport athletes, and we're going to just bank on our ability to develop them. And that's a fine approach if you develop them. And for me, that's where we got to see it. But as far as returning starters, you've got them. You've got that chemistry. And like I've always talked about, for me, offensive line play as a unit is more important than individual. I've always said this, and I've said a large part of that is I grew up a Giants fan. I'm still a Giants fan, unfortunately. But I grew up a Giants fan, right? And I've seen 2 Super Bowls in my life. Both of those Super Bowls had offensive linemen that were not Hall of Fame offensive linemen, that were not incredible offensive linemen, but they played really well as a unit. And so for me, that's part of what shaped, I think, performing as a unit is more important. I cover the Giants in person. And this summer, I was talking with Andrew Thomas, and he's like, hey, having that person next to me that like I know what they're going to do and I know I can trust them, that matters to me. That's the same thing for college. It's the same thing for every level of offensive line play. Being able to work as a cohesive unit matters. Having most of your offensive line returning for 2025 matters for your offense and should make your offense considerably better. And then when you look at that, we talk about explosive plays, explosive runs as well, but being able to marry everything together. Successful run game, play action shots, DJ Lagway, creating those big plays. You should be able to get a 1,000-yard receiver out of this, especially when you get an LIU and a USF to start the year. Just bombs away to start the year. Like that should be your approach. Just first play, let's take a shot. Let's just make some big plays happen against weaker competition. We're going to face some teams that probably going to be shootouts with some of them, maybe, right? Go out there and put up points. And I do think that Florida is going to have a 1,000-yard receiver this year. We'll talk about the defense next. I got a bold prediction for them as well. We'll get that with Locked On Gators when we get back. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And I'm going to let you guys know, I made some risky decisions this past weekend, and they paid off, and I'm very happy for it. Kyle Pitts, anytime touchdown scorer. I bet it on, it was the Sunday night football game. I bet it plus 450. It cashed. Thank you very much, Kyle Pitts. And then on Monday Night Football, I was like, you know what? Let me run it back with another Florida Gator, Ricky Pearsall, at plus 500, and he scored the first touchdown. It was not even 10 minutes into the game. He scored a touchdown and took over there. It was great. Josh Hart, plus 1,700 for a triple-double on Monday night against the Wizards. Hit that. I feel like to end the year, they're just giving out money. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free reviews in the podcast and on YouTube. To wrap up today's show, we are going to be talking about this Florida Gators defense because I'll tell you what, my prediction for them, they're going to be in the top 25. Because they weren't this year. Like, I know they had some dominant stretches, but realistically, they gave up a ton of explosives. They had quite a few pretty bad stretches. Wildly inconsistent in 2024. And I mean wildly. And yeah, maybe a DC change incoming. Maybe this, maybe that. We'll see what may happen with it. I'm going to leave that very open-ended for you. But the Florida Gators in 2024, the 84th best passing defense. That's bad. I want you to know that. Like that's pretty bad. 226 yards, 226.3 yards per game. Okay. 66th best rushing defense. That's middle of the pack, but also you were helped by your very strong pass rush numbers, your sacks, because in college, sacks hurt rushing stats, not passing stats. It's stupid. I hate it, but it's how it works. So in college, sacks hurt your rushing stats. So you allowed 149.5 yards per game, including the 38 sacks that your team got this year, including taking those away from rushing numbers, which means that you really gave up considerably more rushing yards. Okay. And I think that matters more for Florida because you had 38 sacks, which means that you had more rushes that were taken away from the opposing teams compared to other teams. So 66 best, middle of the pack, but realistically, I think it was below average run defense this year. And I think that if you watched the games, you usually saw that. That was a pretty consistent thing there. 76th best total defense in terms of yards and 376.8 yards per game allowed. Again, that's average to below average, but I do think that you were helped with your very good pass rush that really brought down run defense numbers. And the part that matters most to me, you had the 45th best scoring defense, 23.1 points per game. Okay, not bad. That's above average. My prediction is that they'll be top 50 in all of the yard stats and top 25 scoring defense. And here's the thing. If you get there with the offense expected to become more explosive and score more points than you previously have, we're talking about a very good football team, right? I think that you see the yardage total improve significantly. Okay. I think that you see, top 50 pass defense, run defense, total defense. I think that should be the expectation, especially weaker schedule, worse quarterback play you're going to be facing. I think that's fair to expect, right? So your defense should perform better with a lot of, again, returning guys that have been in the system, know how to play it. Make sense? Cool. But again, the thing that I care most about is the scoring defense. I think you get in the top 25. And I don't think that that's an absurd ask. You allowed 23.1 points per game in 2024. If you allowed 2.4 points per game less, then you're there. 20.7 points per game was top 25 in 2024. 20.8 points per game was top 25 in 2023. 21.2 points per game was top 25 in 2022. Those numbers would have gotten you in the top 25. You had 23.1 this year. 2.5 points per game, better. I really don't think that's as crazy an ask when you consider some of the games that Florida had in 2024. 41 to Miami. That's a lot, right? 49 to Texas. That's a lot. Things like that don't need to happen, right? So I think when you consider just those games where you're giving up 40s and higher, I think you get to go, okay, well, I could see where, 3 points per game better, 2.5 points per game better, gets you in the top 25. And I see where it's reasonable, right? You got Caleb Banks coming back, and he was your big pass rusher. You got George Gums with another year of learning how to play on the defense. You got both of them back. You've got most of your linebacker room back. Shamar James has declared for the NFL draft. That's fine. You've got secondary. You got athletes for days. It's just a matter of actually putting it together, which Dijon Johnson looked really freaking good in 2024. You've got Cormani potentially 2025. Talking about some high ceiling there. So for the Florida Gators, I think you're looking at that and you're looking at, all right, pretty successful there. Should have a pretty decent climb defensively. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast. We will be back tomorrow. Talk more Florida Gators football for Locked On Gators. I'm Brandon Olsen. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with New York Giants on SI, and I will see you all next time.